Yeah, today I wanted to give you guys an update on the 2000 Magnum I've been working on. I've made a couple videos about the front drive shaft, and I think the steering bushing, maybe the A-arm bushings. Anyways, I'm going through quite a few things on this four-wheeler. Overhauled the engine, and did quite a few other things, but I just wanted to tell you guys some things I've run into on this machine that are hard to find out information about. But before we go to that, let's talk about buying Chinese aftermarket carburetors. I needed a rebuild kit for this thing, and was looking for a rebuild kit and found this carburetor, actually cheaper than the rebuild kit. I've ordered these before. Yes, I have had one that bolted up correctly and I didn't have to do anything to, out of probably a half dozen that I've ordered for various machines. That one was for an old 200 Honda, but anyways, usually you have to do something to them because they don't fit right or this or that. With this one, you can see here, I had to, can't really tell, but I had to grind out the side of the carburetor right here so I could get my throttle cable threaded in there because they didn't supply enough room. Another thing that you see a lot of, the ports on your incoming fuel might be at a different angle. The other one, the stock one, the Mikuni, came up instead of down like that one. Another odd thing about this is yesterday I went to fire this thing off and just gravity fed fuel to it. Well, it wouldn't take any fuel at all. Wouldn't let any into the bowl. I blew in my little nurse tank that I was gravity feeding it with to put some pressure on it, and nothing. So I figured, well, I'll just pour some down in the bowl through the vent tube right there and see if we can get it to pop off. Well, as soon as I poured it in there, fuel started to run out of the overflow, telling me that the bowl was full. Went to start it, wouldn't even hit. I checked my fire was great, so I went back to gas, opened up the bowl drain, no gas came out. So I took it back off, pulled the bowl off, and in the bowl laid the overflow stem that is supposed to be inserted into the bowl, and it sticks up, when the gas gets too high, it goes over the overflow tube. Well, it was sitting in the bottom of the bowl and had the needles jacked shut, so that's why it wouldn't let any fuel in there. And then when I poured it in through the vent tube, of course the overflow tube was off of it, so it just ran right out and wouldn't hold any fuel. Got that fixed, got it fired off, and then I'll tell you about some things that I seen. Anyways, when I got this thing, it was knocking. The piston had been slapping the head. They had the piston installed backwards. And also I think that they just went through it and took it apart and used the same gaskets to put it back together because the head gasket was super duper thin compared to the new stock one that I got. Anyway, so I went through it and redid it all, put new bearings and did a complete overhaul. I did use the same head, used the same cam, did use the same valves, but I did take them out and clean the seats all up and all this kind of thing. But anyways, another thing I noticed, besides it was knocking when I first started up when I got it, a year ago, was that it had a tick in the top end. I set the valves and the tick was still there. Anyways, so when I took it apart, I thought some things were kind of strange because it was different than my book. On the cam, they have a auto decompression deal that makes it hold a valve open for the first revolution, so the engine's easier to start. A lot of machines have something similar to this one. On that decompression lever, there's a spring which is supposed to hold it to the cam, and centrifugal force takes it out. There's a lot of design changes on these springs. This is a 2000 model, and I couldn't find any information that matched the spring that I had in the books or anything else. They changed that a few times, then they stopped using the spring. They just used it as a spacer, and then the rattle would be even worse. So I put the spring on it correctly, or what I think is correctly, so it has pressure, and didn't hear that noise. Maybe a little bit after you shut it off, it may tick a little bit, but that's I guess common for them. But that just shows, Polaris in the early days, sometimes the stuff that they changed didn't make it to the books. Another thing about this deal that isn't correct according to my book is the wiring diagrams are all different. This is the older style where your starter button's right here. The newer style, you start with the ignition like you would a car. I think in 2001 they changed these, but There's no, in my book, there's no diagram for these. But the main thing I want to talk about today is these cooler lines. All right, these are oil cooler lines. They come from right down here. That's your oil filter. There they are. There they are. Yeah, that is a Wix filter. I usually run Polaris filters. Being as I live 70 miles from the city, and that's the closest Polaris shop, I had some oil, Polaris oil 040 that this calls for, but I didn't have a filter, so there's nothing wrong with running that Wix filter, something like that. But anyways, here's your oil lines. They come up here. There's a recall on these. On this end, they have hose clamps. On the other end, there is a pressed end. So they recalled them. They used to be barbs on both ends. They recalled them and took the barbs off the other end. And I believe they changed this whole setup in 2001, which is what all the books refer to as. And then you have it coming in one side and going out the other side. I don't know which side it is on the newer ones. And the lines are the same size. On this one, you have a larger line and a smaller line that come into this deal, which I believe some people call it the H valve, but I can't even find a reference to that. It has a temperature sender in it. I marked these lines when I took the engine apart, and upon hooking them back up, as they were marked, I seen that the small line was the return line, and the big line was the supply line, which is backwards to everything I know about hydraulics. Usually your pressure side is going to be smaller and your return side larger. I didn't really think a lot about it. Yesterday I fired this baby up. Everything sounded good, except the starter bendix sticking. I can talk about that later, but everything sounded good, and I let it build up pressure, and so the cam at oil, run it at a high idle for a few minutes. When I noticed that I thought it might be getting hotter than it should be, so I felt of the oil lines and they were warm, and I felt of the cooler and it was not. So that kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. Come to find out that they only made this for like 1 year, but come to find out that I believe they had the lines hooked up backwards. So what will happen is if you supply it backwards, it won't go through the cooler and it'll just bypass right through here. So none of the oil I was flowing was getting cooled. So today I went and I took the petcock out of it. Had to take it all the way out. I'd taken it loose before to drain it out, and nothing really came out of it. So I thought, whoever had it last, it was just empty. So today I drained all the oil out of the machine, took the petcock all the way out of it, and first came water, and then came some dark oil, maybe a little bit of new oil. That was another thing yesterday after I ran it. The oil that I had in there was still clean as a whistle, and I figured it would be, at least get some black crappy stuff in it from the residual in this cooler. So that's what made me want to drain the cooler. So running yesterday, there was really no oil going to the cooler, so I took the lines off of it, and blew through them this way, that way, to figure out which way it was supposed to be going. And I believe I have it hooked up correct now. The small line would be the pressure line, which should go into your temp sensor. Now this all makes sense to me. I haven't read this in a book, but you would think they want to measure the temperature of the oil before it gets to the cooler, not after. But maybe not. And then back to hydraulic principles, you have your small pressure feed line and your larger return line. So anyways, hopefully that helps. But as far as YouTube goes, I couldn't find anything that really referenced this stuff. And I have a Haynes book, and it also does not reference this. And I read a lot of forums of the guys had regular Polaris service manuals. They also do not reference it exactly. I love Polaris machines, but every brand's got their kinks, and in the early days, Polaris had a few. Anyways, thank you for watching. Hopefully this helps.